Hello and welcome to the Online College of Coding video tutorial series. This is the third video in the series of Lunar Shift in GameMaker. In this video, we're adding crater obstacles to the game. Before starting this tutorial, it's recommended you've completed the previous tutorials in the series. Let's get started. Our first obstacle in the game is the craters. The player will need to jump over them as part of the challenge in Lunar Shift. Create a new sprite with the sprite button on the toolbar and name it SPR_crater. Click the Load Sprite button and navigate to the crater PNG image. Center the sprite with the center button, then set the origin's Y position back to 0. Centering the sprite like this makes it easy for us to spawn a crater at the correct position. Before we start creating craters, we need to create a crater object. Give it the name obj_crater. Give it the crater sprite, and on the left-hand side of the object window, set its depth to 2. Click the Add Event button and give it a step event. From the Move tab of the actions, drag a Jump to Position action into the step event. In the Jump to Position window, set the X value to -11 and tick the relative checkbox. Leave the Y value at 0. By telling the crater to jump to a -X position, we're getting it to move to the left side of the screen at the same speed as the background. But to actually have the craters appear in the room, we're going to need to create a controller object to spawn them. Use the toolbar button to create a new object and give it the name obj_controller. Click the Add Event button and add an Alarm 0 event. From the Control tab of the actions, drag an Execute Code action into the event, and into the text editor, type the following lines of code. With the first line of code, we're resetting this Alarm 0 event to go off in between 20 and 60 game ticks. Then we're creating an instance of the crater object to be level with the floor, and we're creating it 200 pixels outside the room so that we can't see it yet. Close the code editor and click the Add Event button again to this time add a Create event. From the Control tab of the Actions list, drag an Execute Code action in, and into the text editor, type the following code. To begin the spawning of the craters, we need to initialize the alarm event to 45 ticks so that it can spawn the first crater. Close the code editor and open the room, then switch to the Objects tab. Select the controller object from the list and place one close to the middle of the room. It doesn't matter where. Run the game now with the green play button, and you can see the craters start spawning and moving across the screen after a second or two. We haven't given a sprite to the controller object because it doesn't need to be seen. It just hides in the room and runs its code. Next, let's set up the collision between the player and the crater, which we need to end the game. So open the controller object and click the Add Event button. Add a second alarm event, Alarm 1, and from the Main 1 tab of the Actions list, drag a Restart Room action into the event. This alarm will cause the game to restart by reloading the game room. All we need to do is set the alarm when the player collides with the crater. Open the player object and use the Add Event button to add a collision event with the crater. From the Main 2 tab of the Actions, drag in a Set Alarm action. In the Alarm action window, set the Applies To option at the top from Self to Object, and in the drop-down menu that appears, choose the controller object. Set the number of steps to 100 and choose Alarm 1. Then press OK and close the player object. And test the game. When the player and the crater collide, the alarm's triggered to restart the game. Only each time you collide with a new crater, the alarm's reset. Let's move the player out of the way so it can't collide with any more craters after the first one by getting it to follow a path. Click the toolbar button to create a new path and name it PTH_crash. Set the background of the path editor to be our game room and resize the window so that you can see the player and a few grid squares below the room. Just like we did for the jump path, place the first node on the player, but this time place the second node way below the player off the map so it can fall right out of the way. In the list of nodes, select the bottom node and set its speed to 500. Then click OK and close the path editor. This path is going to get the player to fall down through the crater and disappear off the screen. By setting a higher speed for the second node, the player will move a bit faster and accelerate like there's gravity. Open the player object now and select the collision event with the crater. From the Move tab of the Actions list, drag a Set Path block into the event. Change the action so that it applies to the player animation object instead of itself. From the Path dropdown, choose the crash path and set the speed to 12. Leave the last two settings as they are and press OK to close the Set Path window. Close the player object as well and use the green play button to test the game. At this point, you may have noticed that the amount of times you crash in the game, it kind of seems unfair. So let's fix that up. Open the crater sprite and click the Modify Mask button. Click on the Manual option in the bounding box settings and change the value of the left margin of the bounding box to 35. Change the value of the right margin to 110, and you can see the bounding box changes shape. Close the window, close the sprite, and test the game. You'll notice this time it's way easier to stay alive and jump into those tiny spaces. Because of course we made the collision area for the crater smaller. That's the end of part 3 of the Lunar Shift in GameMaker tutorial. Tune in next time when we add enemies to the game. See you then.